Hi guys, how are you all? This is FJ What If? Today we are going to discuss about what if Naruto was Madara's student part 13. Before start the episode, please like and subscribe my channel. Chapter 13 Steps of the Death God. She was overcome with doubt and uncertainty. Her enemy, the man that had been twisting her best friend to suit his wants and needs, making him into his own pet, had just met with her to discuss a rather interesting topic. Ryuyoke's. Rather. Naruto Uzumaki. A man that was supposed to have died long ago was a dead man walking amongst the living. Obito Uchiha had explained to her who he was. Of course, he was once the Kyuubi Jinchuriki and her former target in their plan to capture the 9 Biju. But was everything the blonde man told her merely a lie? Was Obito lying to her? Was he informing her of this because he wanted Naruto eliminated before their death match in a little over 3 months? Was this all because he was afraid of the blonde Uzumaki? Whatever the case, she didn't know who to believe at the moment, Naruto or Obito. Should she ram her sword through Naruto's chest or confront him for answers? What Obito said to her was merely a choice to walk down a path. Right now she could walk down too. But she was unaware of where the paths would take her. A dream world that would reduce all the evil in the world into nothing and replace it with the positives. Or a mighty weapon that would deter war and hatred in the world through the power of fear, and both bringing peace to the world? The weight of the choice was wearing itself heavily on her. What would her indecisiveness lead to? She couldn't trust Obito, and yet, it seems like she couldn't trust Naruto. She was surrounded by deceitful lies that would lead her astray. But Obito was lying to her from the beginning, and was Naruto lying to her the entire time? She knew him. She didn't know who to believe at the moment. All these questions were stripping away everything she knew. However, she wanted to help achieve Yahako's and Nagato's dream of world peace. But which path was the most trustworthy was the question. She felt betrayed and angered, while also she felt used and discarded. She'd either have to kill Naruto or betray Obito. She knew that as long as Nagato was the official leader of the Akatsuki, she would be safe from Obito, but Naruto was a different thing. He was unafraid to kill anyone in his way, so long as it furthered his plans. Conan called out a voice, which made the blue-haired woman wake up from her daze. She looked up to see Naruto standing in front of her with his blank facade in full force. We should keep moving. She had only just noticed that they were in a dense forest. Her body must have been on autopilot ever her and her partner left Imigakure. How long was she traveling for? There's a small inn up ahead. We should rest for the night. We've been traveling for many hours and your body needs to rejuvenate from the fatigue of the journey, spoke Naruto emotionlessly. Conan didn't answer him, which made the blonde raise an eyebrow at her. Usually she would reply back to him. This was indeed strange, since the blue-haired woman, while quiet, would also respond to her partner if he ever talked to her, so their relationship would grow into friendship, which would help in the future, should there ever be times when they needed to trust each other. There's something different about you, said Naruto, who had yet to stop in his stride. You're quieter than you normally are, and you hardly respond to me at all. It almost seems like you lost your voice. And he was right. He could see with his eyes that Kanan's body language was screaming out that she was confused and troubled. Naruto would admit openly that he had no clue how to help someone like this. Anything involving anything emotionally was alien to the blonde. He couldn't feel anything after that certain event which caused him to become what he is and not power-wise. He just ignored her and kept on walking. Others' problems were not his own. Conan was so engrossed with her thoughts that she failed to recognize the large rock on the path, which made her trip over and nearly fall to the ground. If it wasn't for Naruto catching her before her face hit the ground. However, the tripping over part and the rock was not what surprised her, but instead it was the sheer speed of Rya's movements. She knew that her comrade was fast, but she didn't have time to blink before he was in front of her, catching her. It almost seemed that he magically moved from one place to the other. But there was one thing that she saw. A black stream of what appeared to be smoke trailing behind the blonde. Are you all right? Questioned Naruto as he held Conan in his arms. The female Akatsuki member just looked into Rya's red eyes, but his words were enough to bring her back into reality. I'm fine, answered Conan as she gained her footing as dusted herself off. Although she was wondering how Ryu was able to move at such speed, she swore he was faster than the Kiroi Senko. She had met many fast shinobi over the years, but could she believe that such speed was possible? She silently wondered if it involved a jutsu of some kind that drastically increased the speed of the user. Was such speed possible for just mere taijutsu? Was this another branch of his power? But did it really matter now? So the two just continued onward with agonizing silence, and a dense atmosphere surrounded the two where it could be cut with a knife. Could she kill him, her partner, her comrade, her friend, or was he something more? Obito's words haunted her with each step she took. Nagato, Yahiko. Their dreams and wishes would be fulfilled if she killed Ryu, Naruto, Madara. Whoever he was. But if she was just a tool to him, then why go through the trouble of making her happy, especially when it was her birthday, not long ago, and those gifts? Maybe he only did that so to create an air of trust between the two. And Koi knew the wolf residing in her stomach. If she was entrusted with such dangerous eyes. At first when Obito appeared she thought she was after Ryu's powerful eyes. Ryu said that the eyes were capable of destroying nations in an enemy's hands. She wondered what devastation Ryu could bring with his eyes. She only knew of 3 of the Kamionaneo techniques, but she wondered what the other 4 could do. If she asked Ryu he might suspect her of being Obito's accomplice. But also what would happen to Koinu if she were to die? Many questions, so many questions, and none of them had answers. She didn't know who to trust at the moment. But trust was one thing she needed now more than ever. She and Naruto had been walking on the path for hours, but to her minutes had passed by. Her body was on autopilot and Naruto looked to be the same, only that his eyes were flittering back and forth, almost expecting something to happen to him. She was brought out of her musings when she felt a hand clasp her shoulder. Her mind snapped back to the present when she saw Ryu staring up ahead, still walking towards an inn where they could sleep for the night. But even still her mind was a roller coaster. Could she take the life of someone she had gotten to know over the months? Could she? By now the night had fallen, and the stars and moon took their rightful place in the black sky. Naruto Uzumaki was sleeping in dreamless sleep. His night terrors were still haunting him. He felt doubtful, like he was losing himself and what made him. Him. He doubted he could live up to his teacher's expectations, could he? With all his training and conditioning. Was he just a wasted investment? Sometimes he didn't know who he was. When he looked in the mirror, he would see different images every time. Sometimes he would see Madara or his younger self coupled with images of the Yondaime. Each time it was different and yet it was the same. He just wanted it to be over, to discover who he really was. He didn't want to be a nobody, but that was exactly what he was. A nobody. Someone who must hide females behind a veil of lies and nothingness. Those who possessed nothing that defined them in the eyes of others. He lacked what made people special. Each individual was different, but he had nothing that made him like that him. The closer he reached for the sun, the larger his shadow became. He was striving for something great, but in the process, becoming an entirely different being. He wanted to be like the sun, bright and warm, full of life, not the moon that relied on another's light, dark and cold, nothing but death. Not he wasn't like either, he was in between, to be more precise. He closed his eyes in voided rest and succumbed to the beckoning of sleep. However, a shadow was standing over him, tense like a statue and unreadable like blank page. In the person's hand was a pure white katana, with a long white ribbon and a snowflake like Saba. The person had amber eyes that shine like jewels and blue hair that made oceans jealous. Conan didn't know what to do. She has the perfect chance to bring Nagato and Yahiko's dream into reality. But why was she hesitating now? All she had to do was thrust her sword through his chest and it would be all over. What was stopping her? Grasping the Shiromakaren no Tsurugi, she held the sword in a reverse grip and pointed its tip at Naruto's chest. All she had to do was pierce his chest and he would be choking on his own blood. Knowing that she had nothing else to lose, she thrusted the sword through Rya's chest, whose eyes saw it, open in morbid surprise, and he soon coughed up some blood and gasped hoarsely at what was happening to him. Blood oozed out of the wound and began staining his black cloak with red. He grasped at the blade of the sword, hoping to yank it off him, but Conan held on steadily, making sure the metal was destroying his body and taking away his life. He tried both arms, but Conan's kept holding on, keeping the sword in place. He couldn't say anything other than choke, and his red Sharingan eyes reverted back to the brilliant blue he was known to have. And soon his eyelids started etching their way across the orbs before they retracted fully, signifying that his end had arrived. The hands that were holding on loosened and fell by his side. All his muscles slumped and his whole body was still. Conan felt tears prickling at her eyes. She didn't want to do it. But she also wanted to do it. She wondered briefly if he would forgive her in the next life. Conan. whispered a voice which made the brunette raise her head to see Yahako's face in place, Naruto staring at her with hateful eyes that shone with betrayal and rage. Wake up. Konan too coughed up blood where she looked down to see the Tonbaguri note Tsurugi embedded in her stomach, where it was leaking blood staining both the floor and her clothing. She didn't say anything else other than fall back with the black sword still buried in her body. Konan jolted from her sleep with beads of sweat cascading down her brow. She had just recently suffered a nightmare and she had to say it was very real. Did she really want to do that? Kill Ryu? She was torn between Naruto and Obito. She didn't know who to follow and work with, and she didn't know the consequences brought about by those decisions. She knew nothing about Obito except for his past, which Naruto told her about when she interrogated him. However, she knew Naruto more than Obito, but she still didn't know much about his past, other than he lived a life unlike other Jinchuriki. His past was much worse than others. But both seemed to trust her enough to carry out tasks that her comrades and superiors had dubbed important. She eased herself up in her bed. When not on mission, she liked to sleep in the nude, so therefore she was naked. She liked the feel of her soft bed's fabric brushing against like feathers while she slept. She liked when the gentle breeze peeking through her windows caressed her skin like someone's touch. She wiped the sweat off her face and forehead and breathed deeply. She had never experienced something such as that. Seeing Naruto's death-stricken face fueled and shattered something within her. She never felt such pain since her parents' and Yahako's death, and seeing Yahako's face in Naruto's, what was that about? She had never felt such a thing before, and it hurt her for even considering hurting someone that was one of her only friends. The dilemma she was in couldn't be measured. Kill a friend to achieve another's dream. She hadn't made such a choice before. Ever since Naruto came into her life, it seemed like he gave her a purpose, other than assisting Nagato. He almost made her want to live again. She looked around her room to see nothing but blackness in the form of a cloaked individual standing over her like gargoyle with piercing red eyes. The person removed their hood, revealing golden hair that made the sun envious and skin like alabaster. It was her partner Ryu Naruto watching over her. She had only just noticed that she had nothing to cover her modesty, allowing her perfectly perky, C-cup breasts to be known to the world. Rage coming over her, she did the first thing that came to her mind. She grabbed her pillow and with feminine wrath, assisting her, she smashed it into Naruto's face, where against the laws of physics and nature, smashed him against the ground, where a crack was heard when the back his head met the ground. Quickly covering herself with her bed covers, hoping to obscure her killer body form, the blonde pervert. She observed the damage she had done to the blonde, who currently had a nosebleed. Whether from seeing Kanen's breasts or from the impact of the pillow is your guess. Hours later, after Naruto had woken up from his pillow-induced unconsciousness, the two Akatsuki members were sitting in Kanen's living room facing each other. Naruto's eyes were closed in thought, while Konan was staring at him wearing a white nightgown, and her eyebrow was ticking a second or so. "How did you find me?" questioned Konan with barely restrained annoyance. "You have the largest chakra in the whole city aside from Nagato? You weren't that hard to find," commented Naruto as he removed the tissues from his nose, allowing him to breathe properly. "I wanted to make sure you were safe after the incident at the hot springs." Konan sighed a little. He must have been worried about his eyes if he snuck into her apartment. "Then why were you standing over me like some kind of stalker?" queried the brunette, who was still slightly annoyed. Naruto didn't say anything other than turn his head to a different direction so to not look at her partner. Konan narrowed her eyes a little at the action. His body language screamed at her that he didn't wish to elaborate nor anytime soon. She was about to voice something before her partner cut her off. "It sounds incredibly stupid, but... well, you looked so peaceful," whispered Ryu. He would never say it out loud, but by watching Konan sleep and the harmonious smile she had while sleeping, seemed to melt away something within the blonde. He had never seen such a smile before. It seemed to convey so many things that you couldn't use words to describe it. "You seemed so content, so tranquil. I didn't wish to ruin such a moment for you." However, after watching her for a few minutes while she was sleeping, she began to violently thrash around in a wild frenzy. He knew from his teachings of medical ninjutsu and some psychology lessons that if he tried to restrain her would have made the situation worse. But something hurt him on the inside when he witnessed Kanen's pained expression through the nightmare. He couldn't explain it, but some things don't require explaining. "And if you were thinking that I came here to protect my eyes, that's half the reason. I wanted to know if you were okay. And it seems my fears were unwarranted." spoke Naruto earnestly. Conan smiled softly at the care the blonde man was showing. However, Naruto, even with his Sharingan, didn't see, or was too stubborn to admit what he saw. Conan eased her mind for a little moment, but she still didn't trust him. But she would work with him and not let on that she knew who he really was. But she needed one more question answered. What would happen to Koinu if I were to die? Asked Conan. Naruto, seeing as it was an appropriate question and one made from curiosity, decided to answer. If you were to die, Koinu would be ejected from your body and would return to his home in the Izumi Yumkumomori Spring Dream Cloud Forest, the home of the wolves. Clarified the blonde. Conan nodded at this, but she has never heard of the Izumi Yumkumomori. But she liked the name. Would you like some tea? Asked Conan, being a gracious house guest. Please, said Naruto, signaling to her that he would like some tea. Conan went into her kitchen to prepare some green tea, as the blonde had told her that green tea was his favorite. She returned a few minutes later with a cup in her hand. Here, she whispered softly. As his hand cupped the tea, both Akatsuki members disappeared in a puff of smoke. Until they realized it, both were in a different place entirely. Right now they were suspended in midair above a large river with colorful trees dotting the banks. They both looked down to see themselves above water before they plummeted to the cold liquid, with Conan screaming and Naruto mumbling, "They always do this to me." Using their chakra, they stood atop the water. With Conan's gown soaking wet and now near see-through where you could see her undergarments clearly. Naruto's black cloak was now clinging to him, tightly like a desperate child, while his hair covered his eyes and had lost its spikiness. Conan was shivering as soft wind blew against her. She held her arms closely while rubbing her body for heat. Naruto just stood there unwavering, aside from the mumbling. Slowly he started walking across the water towards the pink, who was following after him. When they made it to the bank, Naruto tucked his chin-length hair aside to view the world clearly. He looked to his side to see the clattering Bluanette next to him. He shed his black cloak off him and threw it over her shoulders, hiding her features and trying to keep her warm. Conan felt the warm embrace of Naruto's cloak, and it felt invitingly safe and warm. She could smell his scent, which smelt like vanilla. His warmth still on the cloak was like a miniature sun, warming her on the brightest day. It almost felt like she was being hugged by the man himself. Conan looked up to see her partner's now naked chest, and the tiniest blush came to her face. Conan stared at the chest of her partner. He wore nothing underneath the black cloak, aside from gloves, pants and boots. His chest was perfectly chiseled with muscle and was not scarred in any place, aside from a hideous scar where his heart was supposed to be. She probably had a good idea that Sasuke Uchiha gave him scar when they fought at the Valley of the End, where Naruto died. It was a grievous wound by the looks of it, and if it wasn't for the lightning numbing the body, very painful. She also noted that despite being wet with water, Rya's cloak was quite warm. It seemed to warm away any cold in her. Like Yahiko when she was around his presence. "Where are we?" questioned the female Akatsuki member. She looked around and beheld trees, willows and cherry blossom trees of various colors of the rainbow, ranging from red to purple. The petals and leaves floated in the wind as if they had their own lives, dancing to a lively tune. The river she had escaped from was crystal clear, and it sparkled like a king's crown. The clouds above her, like the trees and leaves, had an assortment of colors that reminded her of the color of jewels. The air was sweet and serene. It almost seemed like it could set her into a trance, a blissful sleep. It reminded her of honeysuckle with a hint of lavender. Her bare feet rubbed against the blades of bright green grass she was standing on. It was soft as pillows, and she could probably fall asleep on such ground. There were hills and waterfalls that rushed down the slopes of the hills and rushing over again, forming a beautiful loop, and the water sound almost like soft chimes being blown by wind. Was this heaven? Did such a thing exist in this world? Where are we? Breathed Conan, still surveying her surroundings, her eyes hypnotized by the sheer beauty of the landscape, and she slightly wished she wasn't in a dream. "The place we were talking about not 5 minutes ago," whispered Naruto, and then it came to Conan that this was Izumi Yumkumomori. She didn't expect anything like this before in her life. Could savage beasts such as wolves really live here? She first thought the name was ironic, and that the wolves would live in caves surrounded by bones or mountains with a clear view of the moon. Technically you shouldn't be here since you don't have a contract with the wolves. Even worse, Shiranu, White Wild Majesty, hasn't met you. Shiranu? Queried Conan. The few words Naruto has used seem to paint a picture of a menacing wolf. He's the chief of the wolf clan, most like to call him the old dog. said Naruto, looking around, but what was strange, since there were no wolves greeting him. Not even Minus. He then felt something collide with him which was strong enough to force him to the ground and skid across the soft dirt and grass face first, and also creating a large dust cloud. Conan was surprised at such a thing, as it took extraordinary speed to sneak up on Ryu and tackle him to the ground all in one fell swoop. When the dust cloud cleared, it revealed an all-black wolf cub with bright green eyes sitting atop Naruto's head while his face was planted into the ground. "You're here," yelled the small wolf cub who was bouncing atop Naruto's head, which didn't surprise Conan since animal summons could talk. "You never visit anymore," whined the small puppy. Naruto hefted himself off the ground with the wolf cub still sitting on his head. "What have I told you, Shaginu? Shagadog," stated Naruto, which made the young wolf sweat drop in guilt. "Stop jumping on the nice man's head," spoke Shaginu sorrowfully, which made Naruto scratch him behind the ear, to which the wolf cub nestled his head into Naruto's hand. Naruto lifted the puppy off his head and placed him softly on the ground in front of him. "Do you know why I'm here?" asked Naruto, which made the small wolf shake his head and wag his tail. The small wolf then noticed the blue-haired woman with Ryu, which caused the young wolf to grin. "I thought you came here to play with me," stated the small wolf cub as he shuffled his small paw against the soft ground. "So is this your girlfriend?" asked the wolf mischievously with a sneaky grin. The comment made Conan blush a little, but it wasn't noticeable to anyone. However, she was currently thinking of not killing Naruto here, since it would most likely anger the wolves in the forest. She didn't know how many there were nor their strength, so just by having the thought of killing Naruto wasn't good, but she also didn't want to kill him for some reason. She didn't know why yet, but maybe it would come to her. While Naruto himself stared at Conan for a minute, his red eyes betraying nothing but emptiness. "No, she's a friend," spoke Naruto to the wolf. "A special friend," snickered Shaginu. But his fun was cut short as Naruto didn't respond. Then around all of them the ground began to rumble. The small pebbles and stones shook about like rag dolls under the force of an earthquake. Naruto looked up from the wolf cub to see 5 other wolves rushing at him. These wolves easily towered over large buildings and rock formations and could rival the Bigia in size. Naruto and Conan were about to be trampled if the wolves didn't suddenly stop in front of them with their tails wagging and panting like normal, domesticated dogs. "It seems even you 5 couldn't resist paying me a visit," spoke Naruto depressingly and with slumped shoulders. Lined up in a row were the 5 annoyances, as Naruto liked to refer to them, though they didn't mind the name. From left to right were Hirokaze, Grey Wind, Josie, Lady, Natsu, Summer, Nymaria and Yuria, Ghost. The first Biju-size wolf was Hirokaze, who had smoky gray fur and yellow eyes that almost glowed like lanterns. He seemed to be the leader of the 5 as he carried himself in a regal manner. He also seemed the most disciplined of the 5. The second wolf was Lady, who had a very light gray coat bordering on white, with yellow eyes not unlike those of her older brother Hirokaze. Out of all the 5 wolves she was the smallest but appeared to be the most boastful among them. Then there was Natsu, who had a blondish ochre kind of coat. Like his siblings, he also had yellow eyes and has been described by many as the smartest and the most playful of the 5 wolves, almost alluding to his name. The fourth wolf is Nymaria, who just had normal gray fur and dark golden eyes like her litter mates. She has been described as the most freedom-seeking wolf in the forest. And despite being female, she has been known from her birth as a tomboy. While the last wolf was Yuria. Yuria was the largest out of all of them, and like his brother Natsu, his coat was different from his litter mates. Yuria was snow white in color and had red eyes, which differentiated himself from his brothers and sisters who normally had gray coats with yellow eyes. Out of all of them, Yuria was the most quiet and elusive out of all the 5, amazingly, since his coat was the easiest to spot. Yuria was the oldest among the wolves, although he allowed his younger brother Hirokaze to lead. He was also the strongest wolf in the forest aside from Shiranu. "You're here," yelled all the wolves aside from Yuria, who remained quiet as usual. "One of you wouldn't have happened to summon me here, above a cold river," stated Naruto, which made Natsu grin cheekily at him and Shaginu to snicker. Naruto sighed at the wolf, but it was to be expected since the dogs liked to play pranks on him, but were rather serious when the situation called for it. The 5 wolves now seemed to notice Conan with him, and they spoke the first thing that came to their mind. "Is she your girlfriend?" asked Natsu and Nymaria, which caused Naruto to palm his face and Conan to blush a little. "What gave you that assumption?" drawled the blonde man. Natsu and Nymaria were about to open their mouths. "Father wishes to see you," spoke Uriai, gaining everyone's attention, since when Uriai spoke it was always important. Naruto nodded at this and told Konan to stay where she was so to not cause trouble, as he saw other wolves with his Sharingan watching behind and among the trees. Of course they were suspicious of Konan since she was an outsider who had arrived with him accidentally. So now he was walking through the colorful trees of the Izumi Yunkumo Mori toward a palace located in the Menagerie of Colors. This palace belonged to a very old, very powerful being that Naruto himself would hesitate in fighting. He passed by all the large wolves that dotted the area. Some were sleeping away taking long naps, others were playing amongst themselves such as young puppies, while others were doing just what wolves would do. He then saw the palace that belonged to the leader of the clan. The dreaded Shiranu. Or the old dog. Shiranu was not someone to cross. Ever. But the dog was surprisingly calm and friendly, so long as his foul temper was kept in check. No one knew how old Shiranu was, but many claimed him to be far older than other boss summon. And powerful to boot. It was from Shiranu that Naruto learnt most of his wolf jutsu, including the Ubikna Basaka Henkin, Bestial Berserker transformation, or at least the first stage of the transformation. There were 2 stages to the transformation and Naruto has only learned the first one. He could possibly learn the next stage at some point in time. But still his thoughts wandered back to Shiranu. The wolf also had the nickname Senso Hondo, Warhound, because of the many battles he has been involved in as well as the wounds he received. This may add on to the fact that no one knew Shiranui's age, not even his own children, the 5 annoyances and the youngest Sheiji knew. But still the wolf was menacing, that much was certain. Naruto could see the palace ahead of him where Shiranu resided. He met the old dog when he was training under Madara. The old goat had taught him that like every person's chakra which is attuned to a different affinity, so is an animal to which they can summon. When Naruto had tried it out, he was sent to the forest of the wolves and was brought before Shiranu, who took Naruto under his paw and trained him in their arts. So in a way Shiranu and Madara both trained Naruto. Naruto had the bat summons because it was found by Zetsu, where Naruto signed it later on. Seeing 2 massive doors ahead of him, which was the entrance to the palace, Naruto forged on ahead intending to meet up with Shiranu. The doors were absolutely massive in size, comparable in size to the Hokage monument, and upon the doors was a shining sun on the left door, and a crescent moon on the right door with multiple kanji painted in ink, which were in fact seals. Naruto, marching forward and using his enhanced strength, pushed aside the doors with relative ease as the doors weren't that heavy to move. The halls were dimly lit, but he could still see rather clearly. And sitting atop a large pedestal which was somehow able to cater to his size was Shiranu, the leader of the wolves and the lord of Izumi, Yunkumo Mori. Shiranu was among the most gargantuan creatures Naruto had ever met. He was much, much larger than his children, equaling the size of the Hokage mountain and the Kyubi no Yoko as a complete being possessing both yin and yang. When Naruto had first met the wolf, he had no idea that such a creature could grow to that size, and he wondered what the big dog ate to get that big. Shiranu, as his name suggests, is completely white in color, where his coat could rival snow. He had crimson markings all over his body where it looked like it was painted by a brush, with swirl patterns resembling clouds on his shoulders, hind legs, tail and near his paws, and a single cloud-like swirl shaped like a magatama on his forehead, and crimson lines on his face, chest and flame-like patterns across the length of his body. His tail and the fur on his shoulders were rather wispy in appearance, almost like they looked on fire. Shiranu, like his son Uriai, also had red eyes almost the same shade as the Sharingan, and had a disc on his back where flame-like clouds emanated from the disc in a variety of colors of the rainbow, along with a long white mane of fur. If Naruto didn't know who he was, he would have mistaken Shiranu as a god for his appearance alone. The blonde man casually strolled up to the massive wolf, who could easily crush him with his paw or devour him with his maw. Although Shiranu had a temper as famous as Tsunade's, he was patient, yet he hated waiting, which was strange. He was also mostly cheerful, which more than enough times had seriousness laced in it, which just made it sarcastic. He also hated surprises so much that an aura of darkness would surround him, which was more like his foul mood, which affected everyone around him. He liked being told beforehand of events surrounding him, otherwise his aura of darkness would return. He was mostly a quiet individual, though would join in on topics that interested him. His favorite hobby was napping, reading and painting, and with the latter, he would use his tail as a sueo brush. He also didn't like being reminded about his flaws, where he would just fume upon his throne until his mood went away. He also had a low attention span, where if something doesn't interest him he would look for something to entertain him, or he would fall asleep, but if it was something interesting he could never take his eyes away. "You summon me, old dog," spoke Naruto emotionlessly. Shiranu, who was napping at the time, opened one of his crimson eyes to stare at the blonde. This showed that he had the blonde's attention while also showing the boredom he had. And the size of the eye was monstrous, as Naruto was smaller than his eye. If Naruto were honest to himself, he regarded Shiranu as the few who truly cared for him. None of his previous summons, the toads, even cared about him. But the wolves were different. They treated their summoners as if they were their own family. Their pack. Naruto particularly had a very close relationship to Shiranu, since Naruto had spent 4 months of his life living in his forest. Even Shiranu knew that Naruto and himself had a grandfatherly grandson kind of relationship with the young Uzumaki. The blonde tended to grow on you. The wolf also knew that the disrespectful title was merely a sign of endearment, since all his children and other wolves called Shiranu the old dog, which caused the wolf to grow tired of such a name. Shiranu raised his head to look at Naruto more clearly. To the wolf, Naruto was the size of an ant to him. But the wolf knew that Naruto was strong, so it didn't worry him. There was once a time when Naruto was about to turn 14, when the boy had been training himself so hard that he tired himself out when training in the unique jutsu of the wolf clan, where he fell asleep on Shiranu's white coat. That moment always brought a smile to Shiranu and a laugh where he almost crushed the blonde when the wolf would toss and turn in his sleep. "How has the training in Yubikna Basaka Henkin?" questioned Shiranu, but instead of a loud grumpy voice, his voice was misleading and he sounded young, which meant that he was always in great fighting form. However, the question made Naruto sigh. His progress in the transformation was minimal. He didn't know how to properly control, and controlling it through will was hard enough. He had to restrain himself to the limit when he fought Kasami Hoshigaki. He could only direct it and its nature. He hated it, not being in control. It made him feel weak, and he hated feeling weak. Not only that, he hadn't learned how to access the second stage of the transformation. "Shiranu-sama, I still encounter difficulty with the transformation," confessed Naruto, to which the wolf didn't show any reaction. And besides, the second stage of the transformation was superior to the original, since its power was stronger, but the disadvantages were in fact worse than the original. "Many have tried to master the form, but each ended in failure," spoke Shiranu wisely. "They never understood the key to managing that power, although it's still amazing for you to even direct the form, which is an unimaginable feat," praised Shirani. Naruto didn't say anything other than stare at his wolf mentor. "As a reward for getting this far in the transformation, I will teach you the Yubikna Basaka Henkin level 2, said Shiranu, which made Naruto widen his eyes. Level 2 was stronger than level 1, and its power was equal to that of Sage Mode. But like all great power came great consequences. Shiranu hefted his paw and with 2 of his black claws, carefully placed one claw on Naruto's forehead and the other on his chest. Meanwhile in Konoha it was raining. It always rained in Konohagakure. The villagers were waiting for the day the clouds would part and they could see the light of the sun again. It seemed to always rain since Naruto's death. The thunder would resound every morning, waking people from their sleep, and the only light was from the lightning in the sky or striking the earth. When it rained in Konoha, it always felt like the heavens were weeping. Sakura Haruno was sitting in her room. She wasn't wearing much aside from casual clothing she would wear when not on missions. She had just heard the news that her friend Rock Lee was killed in action by a member of the Akatsuki Ryuyokeis. Information had also returned to the village that Ryu was also the dancing Phantom Charge was talking about. So the dragon had taken not 1 but 2 of her friends. She wondered briefly what Naruto would have done. What would happen if he were there? Just thinking about him made her heart wrench in pain. She placed her hand over her heart, almost trying to numb the pain in her heart. She dreamed every night of him and what the world would be like if he were still here with her. Even if he did live, and even if he loved another, she would still love him from the bottom of her being. The only thing she wanted him to be was happy. Even if it meant he would give his love and happiness to another, although she would be sad that his love wouldn't be aimed at her, but happiness was all he needed, and if that person made him happy, then she could only watch. Love was a strange thing to many. Some could round up the word love in 5 words, or they would write a whole book upon the subject. She remembered a year after Naruto died that Lee would constantly pester her for a date. She refused him at every turn, but she never elaborated why. Because his heart belonged to someone else. But with some scolding from Ino saying that she needed to get a man in her life, did she finally agree to a date. It was casual and not too romantic. Sakura wore her off-duty clothing, while Lee wore that hideous, ridiculous green jumpsuit. The date was a disaster. Lee kept stuttering and blushing all the way through, even though Sakura never said anything. He was clumsy and dropped his utensils, and among other embarrassing things, and to top it off, Lee took a sip of alcohol, the tiniest drop. But it was enough to send him to a frenzied hysteria. He practically leveled the entire restaurant into rubble and broke many things and many bones of the patrons and waiters, even the manager. It wasn't until the arrival of the rest of Team Guy restraining him did he finally stop. She chuckled at the memory. But now he was gone. His death had been disclosed to the public, so they knew about it, while Shino's death was kept secret so to not let the other nations believe that Konoha was weak. She looked to her side to see the photo of Team 7. Kakashi was smiling tiredly while patting two boys' heads. She was giddy like a child on Christmas. Just the thought of her and Sasuke together made her smile. Back then, the face of Sasuke was scarred and crossed out with cuts in the photo where his face was, most likely done by a knife. While Naruto, her face softened as she looked at his glaring eyes and rage-fueled face, which was aimed at Sasuke. This was one of the only photos she had of him. She remembered a time Naruto took her to a place which he considered special. She was too cruel back then to even notice, but now she wanted nothing more than to just be in his presence. The thought of Naruto made her head cloudy with happiness, and the words he spoke back then echoed in her mind like an ever-beating drum. Just his golden sun hair and ocean sky eyes made her miss him more and more and to fall for him more and more. However, like her teacher now, she was left with regrets. When she compared Tsunade and herself, all she could compare was their personalities, abilities, their times as genin, and their love life. Swan had lost Dan during the Second Shinobi World War, and the two didn't spend much time together, where Dan died of a fatal wound during the war. It was like her and Naruto, however, she had all the time in the world to be with him, but instead she chased after someone else. She never really got time to confess her feelings for him, but later learned that he died on a mission. Naruto's death. That was something that made her want to break down and cry. The pain it caused her just by mentioning it was too much for her. She had the chance, but then she lost it, like an open window signifying the opportunity and the closed window which symbolized the missed opportunity. She then felt something trickle down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away since her mother said it was better to let it flow. But unlike Tsunade, Sakura didn't drown out her sorrows with alcohol, but instead just tried to bear through it, which never worked, but she still kept doing it. These tears were both for her beloved and her friend, Naruto and Lee. Somewhere outside the village of Konoha, but not too far away, was a mountainous area an hour away. The mountains were perfectly triangular and tall in height, as tall, the Hokage Mountain. The mountains themselves was treacherous, and many stupid civilians had lost their lives to the dangerous rocks via climbing and dumb dares from the game Truth or Dare. That's why the mountains were restricted except for shinobi, who would use the giant rocks for training. But the mountains at the moment were currently being occupied by a man and a girl. The girl was sitting on a small rock away from the mountain, sharpening her weapons again and again for perfect lethality. This girl had Chinese-style bun in her hair and short, fringe bangs on either side of her head. She sported brown eyes and wore her high taillate on her forehead. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse with a high collar and red fastener, puffy pants that looked like hakama, and brown shinobi sandals, and sitting next to her was a large scroll half her size, where she stored all the weapons. This girl was 10, and she was currently balancing kunai on each finger while she watched her teacher train. It had only been 3 days since the death of her teammate, Rock Lee, and to be honest with herself, she was scared to go out on more missions. She was scared because she herself was afraid of dying, well, more like afraid of dying at the Akatsuki's hands. They almost killed Drea, and they killed Lee. They didn't know their capabilities or their movements, and running into them was just by chance. Lee's funeral was held the day before. Everyone of the Konoha 11-3 was there. Tsunade, her attendant Shizune, Kakashi, and the other senseis, everyone was there, except for one person. Her sensei, Might Guy. He wasn't there at all. But why? It was Lee's funeral, Guy's beloved student. She searched all over the village looking for the green-clad man, but each attempt ended in failure. She then figured out where he would be, near the restricted Triangle Mountains outside of Konoha. So right now she was watching him do push-ups on one hand atop one of the mountains with boulders on every limb, including his free arm and head. Every 100th push-up he would switch arms and the rock would go to the next free arm. She frowned sadly at this. He wasn't the hyperactive man that would shout out about the power of youth to the heavens so gods and men could hear him. In fact, since Lee's death he hadn't said a word. He didn't even challenge his eternal rival Kakashi Hatake to one of his over-exaggerated and punishing challenges. Guy wasn't good at remembering faces, and 10 and Neji knew that, which was a trait that annoyed both of them, but something Lee admired. But this time, he couldn't remember Ryuyokaze's face, since he didn't see the man's face, so he couldn't remember him. And that was something that Tenten knew, haunted Guy. He could remember the man, for he had never seen him. Guy couldn't go to sleep without seeing that man's face as a reminder to reap vengeance on him. He couldn't see his face every time he threw a punch. All he could see was blankness. Guy couldn't remember his face, that was both a trait of his and a curse. She saw him switch arms again and going back to his grueling training in order to get stronger to defeat yokais. But he had to keep in mind that the Akatsuki almost always work in twos, and if any of them found their partners weren't too far behind. She briefly wondered where Yokaze's partner was. Were the two not a cohesive team? Does his partner not care about him? It's entirely possible, since not every team in the world got along 100%, even best friends fight with each other at some point in time. Naruto and Sasuke's fight being the king of all best friend fights. But the true question was, how was she going to get stronger? Yes, she wanted to avenge Lee, but she just didn't know how. What could she do? Her overall prowess as a kunoichi was not that great. She couldn't control her chakra that well, and her medical ninjutsu skill was non-existent. She had no experience in other ninjutsu as her chakra levels were too small. But just how could she continue to grow as a kunoichi? She sighed heavily, thinking she was useless. I mean, what could weapons do against ninjutsu anyway? She then felt a presence beside that felt oddly familiar. She turned her head to the side to see who it was, but she had a good guess who. And she was right. It was her teammate and friend Neji Hyuga, the prodigy of the Hyuga clan. Neji was described as a genius by many, including ninja inside and outside the village. Many praised him for his blessed prowess, while others feared him for his efficiency. Neji was at heart a kind individual, sometimes without showing it. After he got his ass kicked by Naruto Uzumaki at the Chunin exams, he started changing for the better. He no longer looked down on others and instead encouraged them to be better than what they were at the time. After his defeat, he trained even harder to defeat the person he made him realize how to live again. He trained so hard and for many hours just to defeat that person. But it was all for naught, as the person was killed by none other than a friend. So Neji trained to bring justice to his friend and punish his killer. He first thought Sasuke was a friend too, but now he has given up hope on the fallen Uchiha heir. But right now he had to start coping over the loss of yet another friend to whom he had witnessed his death yet again. First time was Naruto, however, he wasn't there to see it. But Shino's death he saw all too clearly with his Byakugan. He questioned why his friends were dropping dead like flies. He questioned who Ryuyokaze was. The man was a puzzle, a maze, a treacherous maze where he could lead others into traps. How is he? Spoke Neji, simply, never looking at Tenten but keeping his white eyes on his sensei Might Guy. Tenten sighed at him and looked back at Guy with sadness. The man was pushing himself too far. Has he even eaten or slept at all? No, I think he's been here ever since we returned to the village with Lee's body, said Tenten as she kept staring at her teacher, who was still undergoing push-ups with rocks. He's going to kill himself, said Neji. He could understand, someone like Guy was different. He would drown out his sorrows through intense training, but even with his masterful expertise in the art, every person had limits. No matter how powerful a person, or how weak one is, they each have limits where they can no longer keep going on down the path until they reach the end. He hasn't been the same since then. He refuses to eat, talk, or even look my way. He's different now. Less like himself and more like a machine, continued Tenten. Any wound can heal with time, you just need patience, but it will always leave a scar, and sometimes wounds can be reopened, spoke Neji as he continued to stare at his sensei. He literally saw the man gritting his teeth and his fingers and palms bleeding from all the training. He was literally hurting himself, but physically and emotionally. But, at some point we become afraid of tomorrow, knowing that it could be our last, or it can leave a wound behind that will fester, spoke Tenten as she just kept watching over her sensei. You know, he's been sweating a lot ever since he started training again, spoke Tenten sadly. But Neji shook his head at this. Even without his Byakugan, he could see. That isn't sweat, Tenten, whispered Neji. They're tears. And upon Guy's face were streams of tears dripping down his cheeks and coating the mountain in the salty liquid. The pain of losing his prized student was too much for him to handle. So he would rain even harder than before to kill Ryuyokaze and avenge Lee. Sitting in her office was Tsunade Senju, the Godame Hokage. It was currently dark in her room and the light was dim, almost making everything look gray around her, lifeless. The rain from the storm clouds that were always above the village hammered against the window panes with depressing vigor. Her shinobi were dropping like flies all around her. But yet there was nothing she could do about it. She knew that a shinobi will die. It was part of their career, their duties. They gave their lives to complete their missions and protect their missions. It was foolish to think and believe that her ninja would come back from every mission unharmed and unscathed. She felt like an overprotective mother with her own child, but she knew that thinking like that would only make the situation worse. And what's more, the news that Ryuyoke's had returned to the village via infiltration was disconcerting. She questioned why he came back. She had a guess it was about the counselors, but there was more to it. How could such a thing happen not once but twice? Ever since that man appeared, the world has been spinning faster and faster, spiraling toward something. The man was a ghost. He could be anywhere and everywhere at the same time. Smoke and mirrors was what he was made of. But why did he hide his face? He couldn't have been ugly. Could he? No, that was stupid. But the worst news was that he has joined the Akatsuki, bolstering its power and numbers. The Akatsuki, that organization made up of 10 criminals, was preparing for something. Swan was aware that they were hunting the Biju. That's why they attempted to capture Naruto the first. He had the strongest Biju but fairly weak vessel. But Drea and Kakashi foiled their attempts at capturing Naruto. And she would never congratulate that person, but he was able to buy time to combat the Akatsuki, something which, no doubt, pleased Orochimaru. Drea and Konohamaru were brought back to the village after their own skirmish with Ryuyoke's. At the moment, Konohamaru was spending time with his uncle Asuma while Drea was admitted to the hospital for a checkup done personally by Tsunade. That was something she was relieved about. She didn't lose her best friend to the Akatsuki. She couldn't lose him, he was too valuable to Konoha. He was the only person in the village who could use Sage Mode, and that was something sorely needed for the time. However, what was more important was that he was safe, possibly. Getting out of her chair and staring out her window as she would usually do, all she could see were the droplets of rain bearing down upon her village that her grandfather and his rival made. She wondered briefly what the village would be like if Madara Uchiha was the Hokage. According to her sensei Sarutobi, who was a student of the Shadaime and the Nidaime Hokage, her grandfather advocated to have Madara become the Hokage, so to strengthen his ties with the village and his own people, his clan. But apparently her granduncle Tobirama took certain steps so Madara could never become Hokage, but choosing the village leader through democracy. The clans that were already a part of the village chose her grandfather, and Madara was shortly banished and exiled from the village by his own clan. But the village distrusted the Uchiha as a while, and Tobirama made certain to strip them of their power, so they wouldn't become a threat. Tsunade wondered what things would be like if Tobirama allowed the Uchiha to have a place in the village, and left Madara well enough alone, since it was Tobirama who killed the person that Madara loved the most. Not dwelling on the past, Tsunade left her office, so to visit her friend who was recuperating in the hospital. Drea, who was just lying in his hospital bed wearing their patient gown, was staring out the window at the dark sky that always blanketed Konoha. He didn't know why the village always rained ever since that time 2 years ago. Many in the village wondered why it always rained. The village was known for its bright days and heavenly light, but now it was like a megacure. But just why, when in winter it would always hail, or the snow wouldn't have its spirit and it would feel more like a remorseless winter, a rime in the sky? Drea turned away from the window and closed his eyes in thought. Ryuyoke's was one of the strongest people Drea had ever fought. It felt like he was battling Hanzo all over again, getting his ass kicked left and right by the shinobi legend and his summon. But to Drea, Yoke's felt like death. In that brief instant where he walked the bridge between life and death, did he see something skulking behind the Akatsuki member? He couldn't describe it. But his eyes, they were empty. Something happened in Rya's life to make him that way. Something terrible must have happened. Something unforgivable. They say you can tell what a person is thinking or feeling just by looking in their eyes. But there was nothing in those eyes. Nothing at all. Like a vacuum that needed to be filled. Drea touched the scratch on his forehead. That was formed the man's black blade with rope and chain connected to the pommel. Drea knew that must have been the Tonbaguri no Tsurugi. There were reports that Yoke's had stolen from a classified area in the Land of Lightning. Drea had believed that it didn't exist. But it was just like Kumo to collect powerful artifacts so to increase their military power. The Toad Sage then heard the door open to reveal his Hokage and best friend, and among other things, Tsunade Senju. You look better since yesterday. commented Sinead with a small smile as she walked up to her former teammate. Don't really feel better, Haheim, replied Drea, also smiling a little at seeing her. Sinead had with her a clipboard that detailed Drea's health and injuries he suffered from the day earlier. She inspected the clipboard with her eyes darting back and forth, reading every word of every detail. Most of your wounds are superficial, though you won't be using your right arm for a while. The nervous system in your arm has been scrambled, but luckily, it's not that bad other than numbness, which is the best case. If you hadn't had dodged, you'd be missing an arm, or your arm would be so damaged from the lightning that it would become useless. The cut on your head won't leave a scar, fortunately, and will heal over in a few days, but what I'm worried about is your stab wound in your chest, spoke Sinead, going into her doctor mode. Yeah, that stab wound, as you might call it. Just think of it as a badge of honor, said Drea chestily and grinning like an idiot. It's not the wound I'm worried about, it's where he stabbed you, responded Sinead, which broke Drea from his idiotic stupor. You were stabbed in the liver. Drea didn't know how to respond to this. What's the big deal? Doesn't the liver have like a special ability or something? And that's bad how? Questioned Drea, squinting his eyes and mouth comically. The liver is the only internal organ that is capable of natural regeneration. Even if you have a quarter of the liver left, it can still heal itself, clarified Sinead. I don't see how that's a bad thing, said Drea, who was still confused about it. If Ryuyoke's was trying to kill you, he wouldn't have stabbed you in the liver. If he has expertise in medical ninjutsu, he would have known that there are better places to stab a person, and judging from the way he handled the blade and the wound left behind, while under further investigation, it showcased that he purposely stabbed you in the liver. But the reason for this we will never know, said Sinead, which made Drea go into deep thought. If what Sinead said was true, then there must have been another motive as to why Yoke's took his time in trying to kill him. How come when we look at a painting we see so many things in it, but when we take a second look, it's completely different? Commented Drea, which made Sinead raise her eyebrow at him. He was obviously referring to the fact that, when they tried to answer a question, all they would get was more questions. If only some things were easier in this world of theirs. Deciding to leave her friend alone, Sinead left the room, but not before sparing a glance at her friend, who was too busy looking out the window. Back at Izumi Yun Kumomori, Conan was currently sitting on a small rock, wearing Rhea's black cloak and being watched by 5 Biju-size wolves. Apparently she had just found out that the wolves were the children of Shiranu, the wolf clan leader, and even the one that pounced on Naruto was also a child of Shiranu. And Shiranu was also Naruto's personal summon. She wondered what Shiranu was like. Was he nice, grumpy, or a total dick? She had to admit that the wolves were nice enough. None of them treated her like an outcast, maybe because wolves' packs acted like families. And the smallest really took a liking to her. Naruto had been away for a while and she was thinking where he might be. She was still apprehensive about killing him. But could she do it? No more questions. She either could or couldn't, that simple. But other than his name and what he told her of him, she didn't really know Naruto all that well. She didn't know his birthday, favorite color, favorite movie, his most hated color and movie, nor favorite song genre or his least favorite. She didn't know his hobbies or his favorite phrase or word. She knew nothing about him, and at first she didn't want to. But after doing the things he did for her, she wanted to get to know him on a different level. She would decide that if Naruto was a threat to Nagato, she would eliminate him, and instead would work for Tobi. But she could feel in her heart that killing Naruto would also hurt her. The situation between her and the 2 other Sharingan wielders was weird at the moment. She was torn. She didn't know what to do or who to trust. Decisions like these were always hard. Calming herself, she just listened to the music of the wind and relaxed herself. Naruto, meanwhile, was still in Shiranui's palace, sitting on the floor in front of the Great Wolf, with the massive mountain-sized wolf watching him carefully. It's only been a few hours since he begun training and he can already enter the 2nd stage of the beast mode, thought Shiranu in amazement at the level of skill and potential the blonde in front of him showed. My presence has a calming effect on my summoners. Should they ever enter the transformation, they can control it a lot easier, since I'm the originator of the technique. Naruto opened his eyes, but instead of the black sclera of the first transformation, they were now golden color, almost matching his hair. But there were also many things different about this transformation than its weaker variant. Naruto gasped as he was ejected from the 2nd level of the Abikna Basaka Henkin. His breathing was deep and quick-paced, trying to get oxygen into his lungs. The transformation was always exhausting, but it had its uses. Well, I think I overstayed my visit, spoke Naruto neutrally as he began to leave the palace and Shiranu going to take a nap. Don't summon me during my nap, spoke Shiranu as he saw Naruto leave the palace. The blonde only waved him off tiredly. He left the palace leaving Shiranu behind and attempted to find Konan, which wasn't too early as she was near their original spot. She was currently watching the small wolf pup that jumped on him earlier run around her while she giggled at his enthusiasm. But when seeing her smile, as in genuinely smile, something would just light up inside him. He couldn't explain it or describe it, but it felt minus. He cut off those thoughts and walked up to Konan, who saw him approaching her. "We're going," stated Naruto, which made Konan nod. When Hiroke saw this, he prepared to send them away by placing his paw on the ground where a seal array was created, which surged toward the two Akatsuki members, and in a bright light both were gone before the six wolves' eyes. Naruto and Konan were now back in the Blue Annette's apartment and nothing had been disturbed in any way. She huffed. Some of the wolves were actually annoying. She shed the black cloak which belonged to Naruto and handed it back to him, to which he took it gratefully. Konan retreated back into her own room and changed her clothes, which were still soaking wet from the fall, into the water. During that time Zetsu appeared before Naruto. "Zetsu, I require you to retrieve something for me," spoke Naruto as he rested himself on Konan's couch. "What do you need?" said the plant man. Naruto said something, but it wasn't loud enough for anybody but Zetsu to hear. The plant man nodded at his master's words and sunk back into the ground. Retrieve something for the blonde. Konan returned a few minutes later to see Ryu sitting on her couch with his eyes closed in contemplation. They then heard the words of Nagato acting through the Deva path in their minds, as it was an jutsu of Nagato's, so he could communicate with the rest of the Akatsuki. Both Naruto and Konan used the Gentashin no Jutsu, magic lantern body technique, to appear in a small dark cave with a single brazier in the middle. Their bodies were now a multitude of colors, and across from them was Nagato acting through the Deva path. The Akatsuki has received an interesting mission from several daimyos and nobles, who have been complaining to the organization of a rather troublesome fellow, spoke Pain to his two subordinates. A conman and shinobi thief by the name of Bakudo Puka has been stealing quite a hefty amount of money from daimyos and nobles alike. He robs the rich to feed himself after he lost his occupation when Yugakyur fell into disarmament and became a tourist attraction. This was the case for many shinobi of the village. However, Bakudo has been making many enemies and all of them want his head missing from his shoulders. But he's clever, he knows how to evade shinobi well. That's why his clients have contracted us to eliminate him and retrieve the stolen money, where we will be paid half of it for our services, and there is a lot of money that can further the Akatsuki's goal. For this mission Kakazu will be assisting you too, spoke Pain as Kakazu materialized beside them. He has knowledge of Bakudo, being an old acquaintance of his, and he knows the inner workings of finances and blood money. "I would have Haiden assist you with this mission, but he's a fool." To which Kakazu scoffed, signifying it was true. "And isn't very familiar with Bakudo despite coming from the same village." "Very well, we will see to it that it is completed," spoke Konan. "You may go and prepare yourselves for killing Bakudo," spoke Pain as he dismissed Ryu, Konan and Kakazu. "Not you, Ryu, there's something we must discuss." By the time Pain said that, both Konan and Kakazu had disappeared. "You want something for me, Leader Sama?" stated Naruto. "Yes, as you know, Ryu, you are new to the organization and its workings, therefore you have certain qualities that make you suited for this mission," spoke Pain, which made Naruto narrow his eyes. "Information regarding the organization is and has been leaked to the shinobi villages of the 5 great nations. Information about our movements could be relayed right at this moment. There is a traitor within the Akatsuki who is aiding the villages and interfering with our plans, more specifically our plans to capture the Biju." Naruto raised his eyebrow at this, but didn't comment on it. "And as a result of the information being known, the villages have tightened security on their Biju to ensure they're not stolen right under their noses," continued Pain. "Information is more powerful than any weapon or jutsu. Knowledge makes a person strong by knowing their enemy's weaknesses. And as such, our plans have to be halted for a short amount of time until we capture the traitor. I can already think of possible scenarios running through my mind about who the traitor is," spoke Naruto. "The person must have extensive knowledge on the villages and information to distribute the knowledge to others. This person must be smart, so he could rule Haiden off the list and Deidara, well, maybe, but we will have to see. And I also know that this is some sort of test," said Naruto, to which Pain didn't respond. "You think I am the traitor, a person who appeared out of nowhere and had just joined the Akatsuki? It's understandable. And by assigning me this mission, you also want to know if I'm truly the traitor, and depending upon my reaction, that will be your answer, while if I'm not, you want me to rid the organization of said traitor as well. Does this answer your question? All that and more. Spoke Pain, his doubts about the man being quelled. And I trust you have been protecting Conan? Queried the leader of the Akatsuki. Yes, and I promised myself a while ago that I would protect her, from anything. Spoke Naruto to his puppet. Because I never go back on my word. That's my ninja way. Spoke Naruto with nothing but surety and confidence. And then his astral body disappeared, leaving Nagato alone and contemplating his words. In Kirigakure, in the Mizukage's office, Mei was impatiently waiting for one of her strongest shinobi to walk in through the office to accept his mission. Mei was heartbroken that the love of her life, Ryuyoke's, had walked out her door never to see her again. They were so in love that words couldn't describe the way she felt about him. But also the anger that came with his betrayal. She instantly placed him in the bingo book. Whenever she saw his photo, she either wanted to stab it or kiss it, depending on how she was feeling. This always happened to her when she found the love of her life that she wanted to marry and be together forever. They would disappear or die on their missions. She never knew what happened to them, but she knew what happened to her Ryukun. She wanted him back so much that she would bind him with rope, gag his mouth, leave him in the basement, and never let him go. Wow, this woman has some relationship issues. She then heard a knock at her door, where she signaled the person to enter. The person was a man who was wearing a Kirigakure flak jacket without the shoulder pads, had a black leather jacket over it with flames on the sleeves, a chain belt wrapped around his waist, black jeans which were torn in several places, and boots. He wore jewelry on his fingers of skull rings, had loop and stud earrings all over his eyes, and an eyebrow piercing. The man has green eyes, dirty, blonde hair which was styled as an odd mullet-like style of hair with individual bangs that fall over his forehead, and appeared to be quite young and handsome. The man was Marodi Gita, a distinguished and lazy jonin of Kirigakure. "Sup, what you want?" greeted Marodi casually. "I have a mission for you," said Mei seriously. "What? More work, as if you guys slave drive me enough," stated Marodi, which made Mei sweat drop as he hardly ever lifted a pencil. "Your mission is to bring me Yokaze's head," said Mei with pent-up anger. Not it was time for Marodi's turn to sweat drop, and he felt sorry for Yokaze if he caught Mei's attention. Mei pulled out cue cards for Marodi, who inspected the cards with squinted eyes. "Yeah, got it, whatever," said Marodi as he showed himself out without Mei dismissing him first, leaving the Mizukage flabbergasted at his level of respect. Few hours later, both Naruto and Conan were walking to Takagakure through a narrow and rocky path surrounded by columns of rock, light onto each other. They were told to meet Kakazu there because there was going to be a big gambling event at the village. And according to Kakazu, Bakudo loved to gamble, so a gambling event would be the best place to find the shinobi thief. The two hadn't talked to each other, for there was nothing to talk about. Besides, Conan was still trying to work up the courage to ask Naruto about himself. So things were just as they normally were. The two were currently unaware of someone aiming what appeared to be a deadly weapon at them. The person was on a cliff and had two small scopes on his kunai launchers and used the crosshairs to direct his most likely fatal shot. Too easy," spoke the person as he launched a kunai. Our blonde anti-hero were form his instinctual senses, warning him of danger. Did he duck his head into where the kunai were? The bandages for his ponytail were, which only grazed it, but enough to make it tear, making Naruto's hair loose and wild. The blonde looked up to see the person who shot at him, his Sharingan taking in every detail of the person. He had slicked back, black hair with several streaks of gray, which was tied into a long ponytail reaching mid-back. He had golden eyes and upturned eyebrows with an eye patch over his right eye, and a long jagged scar running up his left cheek to just under his left eye. He wore the Iwagakure flak jacket with a tattered red scarf, with its tail sprouting behind his neck. He wore a long, low-collared, sleeveless purple coat with twin tails. He wore mesh armor all the way along his arms and had two black gloves with the thumb and index fingers missing. He sported brown pants and simple ninja sandals. The ninja aimed his kunai launcher again and fired another shot, where this time Naruto's Sharingan saw the kunai coming and he ducked under it. Conan, who had just noticed, only saw blurs from the surprise attack at Ryu. Transforming into paper aeroplanes, Conan hid herself behind a rock column, shielding herself from the sharpshooter's attacks. Naruto hid behind a smaller rock, which too shielded himself. Not bad. You're the first person since the Yondaime Hokage to dodge my attacks. You're better than they say, that's for sure," spoke the person who was known as Sajiki Bararu. as he jumped off the cliffside and landed roughly on the stone ground. "But still, that doesn't mean you're going to be leaving this place in one piece," spoke Sajiki as he aimed his kunai launchers at the boulder Naruto was hiding behind. He channeled chakra into his kunai launchers where they absorbed the chakra, and when he fired the next kunai, it pierced straight through the rock Naruto was hiding behind, surprising the blonde. Sajiki kept firing at the rock hoping to kill yokais. He wasn't wasting ammo, he had a habit of picking up the kunai of the shinobi he would kill. He kept firing his kunai at the rock where a dust cloud formed, obscuring everyone's view. Konan, still hiding behind the rock, couldn't help but worry for her teammate. She was going to observe for now since she needed to know this man's abilities, and Ryu was perfect at drawn-out fights because of his large chakra and stamina. When the dust cloud dispersed, all it revealed were tiny rock fragments and dozens of kunai on the ground. Sajiki kept turning his head looking for his blonde target. "Tan Torakiku, flying tiger kick," yelled the voice of Naruto as he soared through the air ready to kick Sajiki. But the scarred man only fired more kunai at Naruto, causing him to twist and turn in the air, trying to avoid the kunai. He landed on the ground gracefully, only to see the kunai which were fired at him spin around and redirect themselves, now aimed for his back, where they hit their mark. Sajiki grinned. He had used one of his favorite jutsu, K's right air cushion, wind redirection, which made the kunai redirect their trajectory to attack their person and catch them off guard. However, his grin faded when he saw Naruto disappear in a puff of smoke, revealing a log with the kunai in it. "Katan, Torapuru Kindsum, fire release, triple flame claw," yelled Naruto as he gathered fire chakra into the palm of his hand and drew an inverted triangle made of fire, where he launched a triangular beam, but only made of fire, at Sajiki, who flowed chakra into his kunai launchers and fired some of the kunai into the oncoming fire beam and then dodged it with precise timing. Naruto knew that what Sajiki used to redirect the kunai was wind release, so it only seemed plausible that he would use fire release to counter and overpower the wind. But what he didn't expect was the kunai to penetrate through the fire beam like butter and a knife. Naruto bent his back over and in slow motion, the kunai flew past him while he dodged, still bent over, Matrix reference. He regained himself and threw 2 shuriken at Sajiki. To be honest, Naruto wasn't even trying, but the man's speed was unreal. And he hasn't used that jutsu for a while since he started making his own space tai ninjutsu to work alongside it, but progress had been slow, so he may be forced to use it again. It was nature for speed and strength to never get the upper hand over each other, so only speed could counter speed and strength counter strength. But when used together, then it was a force to be reckoned with. And right now he may need that space-time jutsu. However, he hasn't used it since training with Madara because of its risks on his body, but right now he would have to need it to counter Sajiki's speed. Naruto backflipped away from Sajiki to analyze his attack patterns and jutsu. From what he could deduce, the man had a earth and wind affinity, so kunai that passed through his fire were earth enhanced, giving it defensive capabilities taken to drastic measures where they were hard as diamond, and fire and earth didn't have any special relations to each other. With wind release he could redirect his attacks, taking his opponents by surprise. His abilities were interesting and yet unheard of. The fight wasn't really difficult, but rather annoying. His abilities gave him an edge since Naruto was mostly a close combat combatant, and since fire release were mostly ranged attacks meant that this battle got more annoying. He could use Kamio Naneo, Chikyu Tentano Ibiki, earth-reducing breath of heaven, but given the density of the kunai, and ash release being mostly offensive, it didn't provide a great defense, and this guy must have more abilities up his sleeve. He could also use that, but it was too dangerous and suicidal. The risks involved were far too dangerous. Until he fully mastered it, he needed to know more about this man. Naruto went through some hand seals to release a seal over his eyes which prevented him accessing certain abilities. However, before he could finish the hand seals, he came under attack from Sajiki, who Naruto sensed move position. Naruto looked up to see the Awagekure shinobi, shooting some of his kunai at the blonde via his kunai launchers. Naruto rolled away from the chakra-enhanced weapons and unsealed his seize, the weapon, and channeled some of his lightning chakra into them, increasing their cutting ability and inducing numbness. Naruto threw one his seize at Sajiki, which had a lightning rope attached to it. The scarred man dodged it, but didn't expect Naruto to be pulled along with the seize via the lightning rope. As a result, Sajiki was kicked in the face, then was kicked away and plummeted to the ground, where he tumbled a little from the impact. He grinned in excitement at the prospect of a strong opponent. Naruto landed on the ground and held his seize in a defensive position. Lightning and fire release would be the most useful natures he could use against his enemy. Naruto charged at Sajiki with his lightning-enhanced Seize ready to kill Sajiki, who had gotten back onto his feet, and fire more kunai at Naruto, who easily destroyed them or blocked with his Seize. He tried to slash to Sajiki, but the Oa ninja aimed his kunai at Naruto's head, who was forced to duck, and tried to slash Sajiki's side, but also found yet another kunai launcher in his face, where he strafed away and hit one of the kunai launchers with the pommel of his Seize, ejecting it from Sajiki's hand, where Naruto attempted to pierce Sajiki again. But he then felt chakra above him where the kunai launcher he had hit away, which was spinning in the air, fired yet another kunai at him, without Sajiki's intention. Naruto stepped back to avoid the weapon and flipped multiple times away from Sajiki, where he was crouched on the ground with his Seize in a defensive position. His Sharingan analyzing what he saw, he could only deduce that Sajiki must have expertise in seals to recreate combo seals, the seals which Naruto made for Konan, which allowed his chakra to enter her and enhance her jutsu. However, he noted that Sajiki's was weaker, as he had applied the seal to an inanimate object, and could use his chakra to fire off chakra bolts. He then saw Sajiki pick up his kunai launcher, which had fallen to the ground. Naruto knew that his chakra and overall power was greater than that of Sajiki's, but the man's abilities and jutsu kept him at bay. This was something that disappointed the blonde, as he let this chump push him around. Besides, he was conserving his strength for when he and his partners would try to kill Bakuto. If he was going to defeat this man, he needed the skills of his sealed Mangekyo powers. Why he sealed the others was by personal choice, since he could accidentally send more chakra into his eyes that would activate the techniques aside from the others that were already in his possession. His eyes were always evolving and getting stronger, and it came with the consequence of losing his skill over the eyes. And he wasn't as experienced in their use, unlike the others. He would release the seals on his eyes when he would train with them more. But right now he could train them in battle. Sensing an attack coming from his side, Naruto didn't do anything, as the attack wasn't aimed at him. It was paper aeroplanes sharpened like daggers being hurled towards Sajiki. Sajiki in response fired his kunai at the paper aeroplanes, tearing them apart but also ruining the kunai he used. "His life is not yours to take," spoke Konan with seriousness that Naruto had seen many times before. Konan was in her paper angel form, hovering above Sajiki as if she was one. "Sorry, Poppet, I have nothing against you, but the coot wants this guy's head," spoke Sajiki as he readied his kunai launchers. "So would you move aside?" spoke Sajiki. Konan didn't respond other than fired some of her paper shuriken made from her paper wings at Sajiki, who knew that even with the amount of kunai he couldn't deflect all the kunai thrown at him. So he rolled away and took cover behind a rock and fired some blind shots at Konan in the attempt to hit her. However, Konan backed away and saw Ryu in the corner of her eyes going through hand seals for a jutsu, releasing restriction seals on eyes to eliminate any and all threats. Passcode: "My existence is futile, my life is empty, love is no more eternal than the light of day, only hatred grows and festers, I am the original being and the end of all things, I am the sovereign of everything and the harbinger of the empty space, I am nothing." Futago Kaindeki Kenfuin Kai, Twin King Sword Seal release, chanted Naruto as jagged black symbols appeared in his eyes, encroaching on his irises. He then felt the seal break within his eyes, allowing him the second-tier abilities of his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. He then looked back at his enemy with his now regular Sharingan blazing. Watching Sajiki from afar, Konan was having a little trouble with the enemy. He was fast, no doubt about it, and he didn't leave her enough time to prepare one of her more powerful jutsus, as he never gave her the chance, because of the speed of his attacks. Sajiki, knowing that things were going nowhere, decided to increase the stakes by using a jutsu that would give him an advantage. Flipping his kunai launchers into the air, he went through hand seals for an earth jutsu, one that he created himself. "Doten, Chikyuko Asupsasiwapu, Earth Release, Earth Core Space Swap," spoke Sajiki as he slammed his foot on the ground, where the entire terrain was changed before Naruto and Kanen's eyes. Instead of being in a rocky narrow ravine, instead it was replaced with flat empty terrain and an elevated rock platform where Sajiki could shoot at them with little to no problem. Naruto, knowing that he has lost the advantage of hiding amongst the rocks, channeled chakra into his left eye, even more chakra than was required for the Kamionaneo in that eye. Soki aimed his kunai launcher at Konan, who was still getting over her stupor of the innately changed environment. She didn't have enough time to react, as the kunai, which was flying towards her, was wind-enhanced, increasing its speed and lethality. All she could do was watch the fast incoming projectile ready to kill her. But before she could blink, she swore she saw what appeared to be black smoke latch around her and drive her to the ground. When she looked back up, she saw Ryu atop her body, using his own as a shield. But the thing was, how did he get to her so fast? She couldn't blink and all she saw was a stream of black smoke. Sajiki was also shocked at the display. What did Ryu just use to increase his speed like that? That was his fastest attack, only the fastest shinobis in the world could dodge it. All he saw was a stream of black smoke, and if he blinked it would be gone, and somehow Yosuke's ended up from the other side of the terrain right next to Conan. Was such speed possible? Conan, looking up into her rescuers, Isis could see his Sharingan, but his left eye had the pattern of his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan in his left eye, meaning that what he just used was in fact an ability of his eyes. Ryu swiftly and hastily hefted Conan up onto her feet. Sajiki, now seeing getting over his surprise, readied himself for combat once more. The old coot was right, he shouldn't have underestimated Yosuke's, especially if he was capable of such speed. Went through hand seals for the Doton, Chikyu Sepsusu Wapu, and this time changed the battleground back into the narrow ravine, only this time it lacked the rock formations for protection and hiding. Ryu narrowed his eyes at this and could sense the build-up of chakra coming from Sajiki. It was large, so that meant this was going to be a high-level technique from the Iwa Shinobi's arsenal. Sajiki went through hand seals for an almost certain death jutsu of his, which he would use against Yosuke's. He believed that there was no way that Ryu could survive this jutsu, as if it wasn't for the Yondime's Hiration no Jutsu, then the late blonde Cage would have died long ago. Doton, Kyokudo Shinmi Tame Satsutsuchi Dangan, Earth Release, Extreme Shoot to kill Earth Bullets, yelled Sajiki as he slammed his foot on the ground where thousands upon thousands of bullets made of earth, out formed the cliff faces straight at Naruto. The blonde with quick thinking pushed Conan away, but not before unsealing the Shiroma Karen from her wrist seal by channeling chakra into it. He also unsealed the Tonbagari and threw one of his sais into his mouth while he sealed the other one. He held the Tonbagari like any other sword, but with the Shiroma Karen he held in a reverse grip. He struck an awesome pose, and with speed, agility and reflex did he deflect the attacks flying at him. He was literally jumping all over the place, deflecting the attacks that were coming at him, with the 3 blades, one of which was in his mouth. He had to find an opening to escape, but it seemed useless as the barrage of tiny earth bullets were relentless in their assault, and if it wasn't for the Sharingan pinpointing every bullet, he would have trouble just keeping up with the jutsu. With skill and expertise was he able to redirect some of the bullets shot at him and being aimed at Sajiki, who with his one remaining good eye saw the bullet incoming and barely dodged them himself, but received several cuts over his body as a courtesy for all the trouble he gave the 2 Akatsuki members. However, he couldn't see one of the earth bullets, flying at him right in his blind spot, where if he didn't feel the presence of danger coming at him he would have been dead. Luckily, the worst damage the bullet did was graze him, but it did remove his eye patch where he grasped at it pain. Soon for Naruto the bullet stopped their attack, and he threw the Shiroma Karen back at Conan, who gladly accepted the blade back from her partner. Naruto stabbed the Tonbagari into the ground and went through hand seals to combat Sajiki Bararu. Reitan, Kaminari Yashi, Lightning Release Thunder Palm, spoke Naruto as he prepared the lightning jutsu, ready to kill Sajiki. He ejected numerous arcing bolts of lightning at the wounded man, ready to finish him off, but Sajiki, using his years of experience, jumped away from the lightning in time, so he didn't take any damage. But as a cost he was trapped in midair where he could easily be finished off. Naruto grasped the hilt of the Tonbagari and began to channel a large amount of wind chakra into it all along the blade. Sorasha, Sky Piercer, yelled Naruto as he unleashed a crescent moon-shaped blade of wind, the size of a man, aimed directly at Sajiki, who widened his eye in astonishment and fear. The blade of wind easily cut through the man without any effort. Naruto didn't smirk as he knew that at his victory, as he sent Sajiki replace himself with a log, avoiding death and defeat. Naruto readied the Sorasha again and fired off in a different direction, but missed its target as Sajiki narrowly ducked under it, and using his kunai launchers fired a barrage of earth-enhanced kunai at Naruto, where he used the Tonbagari to cut apart the kunai fired at him and deflect others. Conan, who was watching from the sidelines, joined the fray, too, where she fired paper shuriken at Sajiki, who was too distracted with trying to kill Ryu to see the paper shuriken coming from his blind spot. The paper shuriken quickly cut into their opponent, but the damage wasn't too bad, since all he suffered were bleeds and wounds. Sajiki had the slight feeling that Yosuke was merely playing with him, as some predators actually liked to play with their food, or his unique talents gave him an edge over Yosuke, who wasn't used to fighting such a style of combat, and he had to admit that some of his jutsu were actually fairly clever. Jumping away from both Ryu and Conan, Sajiki planned his next move, so to eliminate his target, he never hoped for the woman to get involved, but he could see the conviction in her eyes. There was a will to protect something important within those amber eyes. Sajiki had only seen those eyes few times in his life, once in the Yondaime Hokage's eyes. Those eyes could tell you all they wanted. It meant that they would hand down their lives to protect what was important to them, a village, a treasure. A loved one. Only those of purest heart had those eyes. And every time Sajiki saw those eyes, it's as if he was facing a mighty bear, protecting her offspring. He chuckled. He remembered growing up and his mother telling him that mother bears would go to any length to protect their children. Sajiki respected people with those eyes above all else. But still, those eyes would not stop him in his mission to kill Ryuyokeis. When the Tsuchikage gave out an order, it meant following that order with rock-hard attitude, even if it meant death. He would not return to his village empty-handed, and he would not feel the shame of failure. He would never admit it to anyone other than himself, but he thought of the Sandaime Tsuchikage as his own father, since the old coot was there for him when his parents died, and he was there for him when he made his first kill. And unlike most other Iwagakure shinobi who liked to kill, Sajiki hated taking life as it meant he was ruining another. But as a shinobi he was forced to do it. Maybe it was his background as an orphan that made him hate killing, as his parents were killed by Kumo shinobi, and usually someone in his shoes would want revenge, but with some kind words from Onoki he was able to see past revenge and instead look to the future, although he did have an ego problem which many commented on. Using the Doton, Chikyusepsusuwapu to change the terrain around him, he create a field of empty space, except for a tall spire of rectangular rock where he landed atop the mighty stone face. He brought out his kunai launchers again, ready for his final attack. If he couldn't kill Ryuyokeis, then he would take the blonde bastard with him to the afterlife. Quickly switching ammo to different kunai, but with exploding tags on their hilts, was he going to kill Ryu with explosions? Aiming his launchers, he fired off a barrage of kunai, which detonated on impact. Naruto again channeled large amounts of chakra into his left eye, preparing his speed jutsu once again. Kamiyona Neo, Sutepu no Shinigami, Steps of the Death God, thought Naruto as he prepared the jutsu he was going to use to defeat Sajiki Bararu. The Sutepu no Shinigami was a space-time ninjutsu of terrifying speed. The user of the jutsu could distort space and slow down time to the point that it almost looked like it has stopped completely. However, Naruto would not be affected from the time distortion, and he could move around freely as if he wasn't hinged by the restraints of the world. However, like all powerful ninjutsu, this had many drawbacks. If any part of Naruto's body, with the sole exception being his feet, were to touch any object larger than 2 centimeters, then the time distortion would break and return to normal, such as if his shoulder bumped in a rock, the distortion would break, or if he touched something with his hand. But if there is anything connected to his body before the distortion, then he can freely touch that item, and there was a certain amount of time before he could use the jutsu again. 3 seconds, which wasn't long really. And he could only distort time for a few seconds, 10 seconds at most, so it was a tricky jutsu to control and a difficult one to master. And had the added benefit of creating an illusion around him where people would see events running at their usual time and nothing would seem out of place. The black smoke was the sign that he was using the jutsu. Black smoky chakra would radiate off his back. Even the blonde didn't know why it was there, it just was. But still, even before he joined Madara, he learned best through his body, not his mind, so using this jutsu now will only increase his effectiveness with it. Naruto distorted space and time around and began jumping between the cliffs to get to Sajiki, as he was too high up and he could have laced the rock pillar he was standing on with traps, so this was the best way. To everything around Naruto, things appear to have stopped entirely, but that was false. The space-time ninjutsu only slowed down time, it didn't stop it. When he reached the top of the cliff face, the smoky aura around him faded, meaning that he was ejected from the jutsu. Sajiki, seeing a black stream of smoke jumping back and forth for only a split-second, looked to his left to see Ryu running up a cliff face. He took out his kunai launchers and aimed at Naruto, who had just jumped off the cliff flying towards Sajiki, who shot kunai at him in response. Naruto, channeling chakra into his left eye, again slowed down time. As he was still flying towards Sajiki, the kunai he launched were suspended. The only problem was Naruto himself wasn't suspended, so he maneuvered himself around the kunai with agility. When he landed on the rock spire Sajiki was standing, which was big enough so that he could fit 2 people, Naruto made the mistake of accidentally placing his hand on the spire's ground, which broke the time distortion. Sajiki, with his amazing reflexes, aimed his kunai launcher at Naruto's head, where the blonde looked up with his now normal Sharingan eyes, unafraid of the man in front of him, ready to kill him. Naruto eased himself up where he was now standing on his own 2 feet, still looking at Sajiki, who was grinning. What was happening? The Iwa shinobi in a second fired a kunai into Naruto's head, where the sharp metal lodged itself into his forehead and Naruto's own shook violently from the impact. Sajiki dropped his arms to the side in exhaustion. That was one of the hardest fights he's been in. Conan just looked worried for a second. But still something was wrong, and it was too late for Sajiki to notice. White mist was leaking itself out from Naruto's wound on his forehead. Sajiki, who was still too tired to notice, didn't see Naruto's head look back at him while the blonde removed the kunai lodged in his skull. And it was already too late for Sajiki as he felt something sharp penetrate his shoulder, causing him to writhe in pain and fall to his knees. He then felt pressure on the back of his head where it exerted more pressure, causing his face to collide with the hard ground of the rock spire. Naruto had little patience for this man. Although he did have the great urge to kill him, his mind was running circles around itself. He knew exactly who this person was. A high-ranking jonin of Iwagakure and close confidant of Onoki. Logic overcoming his wants, Naruto grasped the back of Sajiki's head and lifted his face, so now they were staring directly into each other's eyes. "You will obey," whispered Naruto as he channeled chakra into his right eye. "Kamionaneo, Tekken Seibutsu Senshukoti, Iron Fist subjugation of the Tyrant Emperor," said Naruto as he now had Sajiki under his control. The Tekken Seibutsu Senshukoti was like Kotemitsu Kami, but instead of a genjutsu it was a mind jutsu, where the user could take complete control of a person, as if they were their slave, they would just obey. However, the jutsu left a mark on the person that mind readers such as Inoichi Yamanaka could see. That's why Naruto went to Sasurai and his memory concealment jutsu, so he could rid the mark and have the person not even remembering they were a slave. Naruto unceremoniously dropped Sajiki's head back onto the ground. Pulling out a scroll from his inner coat pocket, Naruto unraveled the scroll in midair where he placed his finger on the parchment where Fuinjutsu markings started to appear. If one was skilled enough in Fuinjutsu, they could duplicate ink with their chakra. Naruto dropped the scroll onto Sajiki, who was unconscious at this time and still had a kunai buried into his shoulder. Naruto performed a hand seal where he sealed Sajiki into the scroll. If people could seal giant beasts the size of mountains like the Biju, then sealing people wouldn't be that hard. Upon the seal of the scroll was the kanji for human, which symbolized Sajiki trapped in the scroll. Naruto tied up the scroll and placed it into his coat's pockets where it would be safe. "We should go," spoke Naruto, acting as if nothing happened, to which Konan nodded at him and both left. And both begun their trek to Takagakure, but not before stopping at an inn to rest for the night. So there he was in the dark of night, silence reverberating through the empty rooms. Naruto waiting for something he would be doing for a while. Sitting on a slightly comfortable couch, with moonlight shining down on him. His crimson eyes piercing the surroundings of darkness. Hollow, empty, voided. Naruto was counting down to something, waiting for it to happen. Something he would do every month, something he waited for each second. "It's time," he thought to himself. He activated his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and his eyes started to bleed, and his small orbs flittered violently back and forth. He seemed to almost be in a trance. His eyes became more erratic and wild, and they bled more and more with each passing second. Just what was happening to him? Would be the question everyone would ask. He was breathing hoarsely and he was shaking a little. But in an instant, in a second, he stopped convulsing and his breathing returned to normal as he held his head in his hands. "Good," spoke Naruto for apparently no reason at all. In front of him, his most loyal lieutenant melded from the ground. "Do you have it, Zetsu?" questioned Naruto as the trails of blood on his cheeks dripped off his chin. Zetsu saw the blood on Naruto's cheeks and he knew immediately what was happening. It was that time. Reality returning to reality, he brought syringe filled with red liquid, which he was holding in his hand, and gave it to Naruto, who looked at it with his bloodied eyes. "You're probably wondering. It wasn't easy to get," said Zetsu, make Naruto look at him emotionlessly. Zetsu, knowing that the look was coming, melded back into the ground, and left Naruto alone, who got off the couch and headed into a room. When he opened the door to the room, he saw Konan sleeping soundly in her bed as if nothing was wrong, wearing suitable clothing for rest by the way. Naruto walked to the edge of her bed and placed his two front fingers on her head, using a genjutsu on her that will ensure that she won't fight back. "If Obito wants me dead, he shouldn't send others to do it for him," whispered Naruto as he pushed aside blue hair, revealing Konan's creamy neck. "Be grateful for what I'm about to give you. I want to see how events play out, and I want to know which side you're on and who you trust. Until then, make use of what I'm about to give you," said Naruto as he inserted the syringe into Konan's neck expertly and dripped the red liquid right into her blood. "I'll be waiting patiently for that time, and what course we take." Konan. End of chapter 13.